The Baltimore Ravens signed Ronald Darby on Thursday in the wake of Marlon Humphrey's surgery, and we talk about what he brings to the table for the Baltimore Ravens and so much more coming up next here on this Friday edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostrecker of Ravens Wire here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making us your first listen each and every day on the show. Free and available, as always, all podcasting platforms. That includes over in video form on YouTube, where we are rounding out our first week of the new setup. We got the live fish in the background. It's an exciting time here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens, though, is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to fast about your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL, LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back with us here on this Purple Friday, it is former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver, Super Bowl champion, Qadry Ismail, to talk about Ronald Darby, talk about Marlon Humphrey, the joint practices, preseason. We got a full slate here today, Q, and the Ravens, they unfortunately got the news of Marlon Humphrey, but they did stay busy on Thursday, and they brought in at least one guy that will at least try to replace Humphrey, although no one can do that with how good he is.
Yeah, I think the Ravens podcast community, we have been preaching about this corner situation from the beginning of the offseason. And now that training camp is here, mother of pearl. Like, why couldn't we just leave well enough alone? Like, they were doing fine. Everything was fine. Everybody was like, oh, Marcus Peters, he's gone. Oh, but we still need cornerback depth. And to that point, when I look at the way in which this team was trending, I thought, yeah, as long as Marlon is healthy, these young dudes that are out there now, they're getting some valuable playing time and experience, and I think that's going to serve them well. Well, I'm out there at the Commanders practice, and I'm like, is it me or there's no 44 out there? And, of course, obviously, news comes down that Marlon has to get his foot looked at, and that's where, you got to press the panic button in some regards. Obviously, the reports out of the castle are going to be more positive. We're going to have to figure out, who's going to replace him, how all that's going to look, all those cliched coaching speak, but make no mistake about it. This is a big blow. Sure, he'll be back, but you always got to wonder, how the rehab is going to be. I know he's going to be of strong mind and really want to aggressively come back, but it's still an injury. It's to the foot, no doubt. Everybody needs that stability, but especially when you're going backwards, planting your feet in the ground and then trying to transition and move forward. That's going to be a challenge. But the challenge also for the Ravens, Mike McDonald, I got a room full of guys, and none of them are the level of a Marlon Humphrey.
No, that's exactly what it is, where Humphrey was by far and away the best corner on the Ravens roster, one of the best corners in the entire NFL. It's not easy to replace him. In fact, with the options the Ravens have, it is pretty impossible to replace him. So they did their best to try, though, I guess, on Thursday. Going out there, they bring in Ronald Darby. Now, to me, Q, Darby was one of the best options left on the market, and granted, there's not a lot there left, but he's someone that, interestingly enough, tore his ACL in week 5 of last year. So he actually played pretty well for the Broncos before then, but obviously he's about 11 or so-ish months removed from the ACL surgery at this point. So there is a question about, well, where is he on his timeline for recovery? Was it just the ACL, or were there more ligaments that were compromised in that injury? Plus the fact that I feel like if the Ravens were bringing him in to not replace, but I guess go through the first couple weeks without Marlon Humphrey, they must feel at least somewhat confident that he could get back on the field by week 1. But for ACL, we've talked about the injury before. For Darby and being 11 months out, what's kind of your prognosis and your analysis on when he could be back in his week 1 realistic?
Yeah, here's the thing. When you look at an ACL tear, protocols are far and away more aggressive than they were just even a few years back. I think that's a good sign because, 11 months is 11 months. However, John Harbaugh was talking about bringing the guy in. He's like, there's not that many veterans out there, but the veterans that are out there, they got to be in shape, ready to go. So when I look at Darby, they're not just bringing him in and saying, oh my God, like we're going to rehab you and all. You got to be ready to go. So there's something there. There's some tests that he must have passed even just to get his foot through the door. That's my strong understanding. No, they brought him in like, you're ready. Let's go. Like, we're going to need you. So kudos to him for getting himself right and getting his mind right as far as the mentality that it takes to rehab from an ACL.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's definitely not easy, especially when you're first getting back on the knee and seeing if you're comfortable enough to play on it. It's definitely a grind to do that. But in terms of what he brings to the Ravens, Q, he's a player that was drafted in 2015, a Buffalo Bills second round pick. Actually, that year finished. We did a live stream yesterday. I kind of talked about the signing then a little bit too, but he finished second in defensive rookie of the year voting that year behind Marcus Peters, former Baltimore Raven, who obviously won that award in Kansas City. But to me, he's an outside corner, doesn't play in the slot a lot. So essentially, with Rock Ya-Sin being primarily an outside guy, Ronald Darby being primarily an outside guy, when Humphrey comes back, you would hope at least that they'd have a 3 cornerback rotation a la what they had with Humphrey and Carr and Jimmy Smith, and then Humphrey and Marcus Peters and Jimmy Smith. But the Darby signing doesn't necessarily solve their slot issue. I think it's more of a 1-for-1 replacement for Humphrey without it being a 1-for-1 replacement for Humphrey, because obviously Darby is not nearly the level that Marlon Humphrey is.
Well, one of the things that we're also having to realize, Kyle Hamilton had been looking really good and strong. And he had played, close to the line, covering tight ends and covering slot guys. I think for Mike McDonald, it's about the packaging. It's the different looks and who goes where. I think that because of Kyle Hamilton's flexibility, you got an asset, and you don't necessarily have to pigeonhole yourself and think, well, we need a slot guy. We need an outside guy. You need depth. I think that Darby brings depth. But then also at the same time, I think, we got a lot of preseason left. This isn't, the regular season is a little bit of ways away still. He's going to be, meaning Kyle Hamilton, he's going to be put in some positions that is going to be favorable. But then at the same time, you're going to get some young guys that are going to get some quality playing time. It's either going to solve the issue or it's going to force Mike McDonald to figure out some different things.
Yeah, and I think, again, preseason training camp practices, this is the time to figure out what you have and what you don't. And for Hamilton, you mentioned the versatility that he has as a safety, as a nickel corner. Baltimore's going to have options with him. And at the end of the day, Q, what the Ravens are going to have to do with Humphrey being out for however long he is the fact that they're going to have to disguise that weakness with some of their other strengths. So whether that is putting Hamilton in the nickel and using Geno Stone as a safety, whether it is using some of the young guys as outside corners, they have options. But for Darby, he's a guy, to me at least, that in terms of what he brings, it's an outside presence, someone who you can rely on if he's healthy. And that's the key part. Is he healthy for week 1, and can he stay healthy for a full season? And like we saw with Marcus Peters, how does he react to a full NFL season on the knee? Is he going to struggle to come back? Because I think we saw it with Marcus Peters last year. Now, Darby's a little younger than Marcus Peters. He's 29 right now, 29 and a half or so. So a little bit younger in age than Peters. But for some players, that knee injury, it's either they come back and they're back to their full self. And for others, it's they come back and they need time to adjust and just time to get back on the field. So for one way or the other for Darby, someone who I think was a solid signing based off of who was out there. But obviously, you're not going to replace Marlon Humphrey and what he brings. And coming up, we're going to be talking with Q about Marlon Humphrey's injury, how it all came about, in the timeline for his recovery. So we should have stayed tuned. A lot to get to here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. And these days, having a potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for a small business. You want to be 100% certain you have the access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs lets you find the right people for your team faster and for free. And for me, I've had a ton of great experiences with LinkedIn, and so many others have as well. And it's really easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. What you have to do is add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame, to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. They have simple tools you can use like screening questions and make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience. So you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and who you'd like to hire. And it's really important to start the year off strong, and the right team member could help you do that. Why Small Business Right Leading Jobs, #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. Leading jobs so you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to you fast about your job for free. LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back on our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Kadri Ismail talking Ronald Darby, talking Marlon Humphrey. And we're going to get into Humphrey now, Q, because it's so, I don't even know what the word is. I guess fascinating how this whole thing came about. It was very unsuspected by a lot of people. I was not expecting to hear Marlon Humphrey had surgery and was going under the knife with his foot surgery, but here we are, and Humphrey's out for however long. I know the timeline, the soft one, is about a month or so. But with these foot injuries, Q, my question is, usually, at least from what my understanding is, they're very fragile. You have to be very cautious with them. And so if John Harbaugh said it was a lingering thing, obviously we don't know all the details. They weren't provided. But what kind of goes into diagnosing a foot injury and the process that it takes up to surgery?
First and foremost, when you're out there running, you're feeling something different. So if you're feeling something different, you're going to, talk to whomever about it, figure out a treatment plan. Said treatment plan, if it starts to work, then great, cool. Off you go, Marlon, and kumbaya. But I think probably what happened was that it wasn't getting better. MRI the heck out of him again, compare notes, whether or not, what stage of weeks or months or whatever. We don't know those fine-tuned details, like when. But if it's been a lingering thing, then that means that the MRI is showing that it's not getting better. And then that's where the surgical option comes in. I mean, usually it's like some level of a, potential ligament, it can also be some cartilage type thing or ligament type thing or maybe bone spur type thing. This is his 6th season, and he did play at Alabama, and that's a lot of football. That's a lot of hardcore football. So it could be a scenario where it's cleaning up something. And so it's not a break. That to me sounds more logical. So best case scenario is he has some level of just like floaters. Because, here's the weird thing about it. Like, you didn't really see him limp. I was out at practice multiple times, and I never saw him really limping. But, Kevin, I just think that it might just be a cleanup and he might be back out.
Hopefully that is what it is, because I think that they cannot afford to have him out for an extended period of time. They're obviously going to for at least a couple of weeks. But if it is a cleanup, then there's hope maybe that he can come back maybe when that month timeline is up or on the earlier side, as opposed to them having to hold him out for longer because there was another issue. And it can be, instead of that week 3, 4, 5 timeline, maybe it's week 6, 7, 8. And obviously that keeps pushing into the season here. But with Humphrey, Q, I know there was a lot of weight on his shoulders anyway, with how the lack of, I'd say, proven depth that the Ravens had at that position. But in terms of Marlon and coming back from this injury, it's weird because of the timing, because it's right before the season. And if you're the Ravens, you have to kind of toe that fine line of not rushing him back because you don't want him to get re-injured, but also you kind of need him back at some point as early as you can get him back. So obviously the Ravens have exercised the cautious route for most of their players. I think they're very in tune with we don't want to risk re-injury for the most part with their guys. So in terms of a timeline, since we don't know what's going on, it's hard to kind of actually diagnose and put something on it. But if you had to maybe say that the Ravens would take a certain approach, is there more urgency in your eyes, Q, for the Ravens to get him back on the field because of the timing of this whole thing?
The urgency as far as just the season in general?
Yeah.
Put it this way. Here's the urgency. Yeah, I think it might be just cleanup. So that being said, if you want to know, we didn't give up 300 yards passing. 2-0. Man, that's a quality group of receivers out there, bro. We gave up, 350. If you 3-0, oh, take your time. We need you when we need you. We're good. Now, if you're 1-3, bro, what you looking like? That record is good, you're good. That record ain't good, all hands on deck. Come on, we hope you you get back out here sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think part of it, Q2, with Marlon is that I think with the way the schedule has been played out for the Ravens, at least how they got it, week 1, they're going to play Houston, CJ Stroud. So you would hope that even without Marlon, they could win that game. Then you have I don't know if it's going to be Joe Burrowless Bengals, if he'll be back at that point, but you have to go on the road to play Cincinnati. Week 3 is Anthony Richardson. Then you have week 4 and 5, Pittsburgh and Cleveland, those 2 other divisional road games. How does the schedule with Humphrey out? Because assuming he's going to miss maybe the first couple weeks, first month of the season, it's not like they're playing Mahomes and Rodgers and all these top tier quarterbacks early, but they do have Burrow on their schedule if he plays. Does the schedule maybe make you feel a little better about the time Humphrey's going to miss? Obviously, you can't feel great about it, but with knowing you're playing a couple rookie quarterbacks, Baltimore should be able to win at least a couple of their early games without him.
Well, Pickens and Watson are no slouches. So they're division opponents. They know you. You know them. Can't take them for granted. I think it's one of those scenarios where, look, Marlon, you're good. Yeah, I'm good. You know, we're doing our rehab. Great. We're 1-0. Marlon, we don't need you. 2-0. Marlon, great. We know we had, our challenges with this, unit. They're great. We held off. You get to Pittsburgh, it's like, you know what? You're feeling good. However, and I think that's where you start to make a decision. It's great that you got Stroud and Richardson on the docket or a banged up Burrow on the docket. It all depends on how your guys are doing and how Marlon within that is progressing along. Like if he's 85%, like rolling with it and offense is putting up a ton of points and, they're undefeated and all that, Marlon, take your time.
Yeah, I think either way you want them back as fast as you can get them. But at the same time, I think there's less urgency. If you're the Ravens, if you start off 3-0 or 4-0 and you're thinking, oh, yeah, we didn't have Marlon for all those games. And if you're the Ravens, probably thinking to yourself, well, maybe we can afford a loss or two here. Now, you never want to lose a game. Obviously, you want to go out there and try to win them all. But your chances of winning go up significantly with Marlon Humphrey on the roster, or at least playing for you. But if you talked about it, if you're 1-2, if you drop a couple games that you should have won, but maybe Marlon was the difference, if you're the Ravens, you're kind of thinking, all right, Marlon, how you feeling today? We talked a couple minutes ago. How you feeling now? You want to get him back as fast as possible. So I think it will depend. I think at the same time, Baltimore will probably continue to take the cautious route. We saw it right last year with JK, with Gus, with Marcus Peters, all those guys. They took the cautious approach, and that meant not having them ready for the start of the season. So for Marlon, with how important I think that Baltimore knows he already is, I think they'll probably take the more cautious approach. Honestly, I'd prefer that, but I do understand that on the field with Rock Ya-Sin, with Ronald Darby, with all those guys, they're not Marlon, and the cornerback room significantly, the talent level decreases when he's not out there. Plus in this division queue, it's Jamar Chase, Higgins, Tyler Boyd. It's George Pickens and Allen Robinson and Deontay Johnson. It's Elijah Moore and Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones. It's still slouch of a wide receiver corps over the course of this. And the Ravens have theirs too now, but you got to defend your opponents. So coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk about if Baltimore needs to bring in another cornerback in the wake of Marlon's injury. We'll talk about the preseason. We'll talk about joint practice takeaways and a lot more coming up next on this Locked On Ravens episode on Friday. We're back rounding out Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with Kadri, Ismail, and Q. With Marlon's injury, the Ravens have had to do, I'd say, some soul searching in that position. They honestly should have been doing it before, but here we are now. Ronald Darby comes in, but they were keeping tabs on another corner. And maybe by the time this comes out, they've already signed him. But Anthony Brown, not the Ravens quarterback. They're not going to put him over there at corner, but the Cowboys cornerback who was there. He's there since 2016. He's been there for 7 years. 6th round pick out of, I forget where he went to college actually, but a 6th round pick. He's somebody that the Ravens apparently like. They're keeping tabs on his recovery. He actually tore his Achilles during the 2022 season. I think it was around week 12, week 13. He did that. So a couple of maybe injured recovering guys coming in Darby and potentially Anthony Brown. But do you think Baltimore needs to add another corner on top of Ronald Darby? Or would you rather, again, trust the young guys, Jalen Armour-Davis and all those players? But as we know, Rock Ya-Sin is still out, Pepe Williams is still out, and there's uncertainty with when they're going to be back.
Well, that's the thing. This again could be a moot point if, in fact, they are back by week 1. And if they are back by week 1, they play well. Our record is good. Our defense is getting to the quarterback. I think that's a situation where you don't try to go out and just sign another guy, whether it be Anthony Brown or someone else. Now, as the roster starts to shape up and there are some veterans that might not be making it on another team's roster and they feel confident, you know what? We like our roster. We appreciate you. Sure, the Ravens can look at that and possibly bring him in. But I think, again, you're also looking at these young guys, and these young guys are going to have to grow up real quick. Depending upon the severity of what we're seeing with Marlon's timeline of recovery, that dictates everything.
Yeah, it is, because with Marlon, the Ravens, I'm sure, have a rough idea of when he could be able to come back. Now, obviously, that is very fluid. You can't have an exact day because everyone recovers differently. But if I were the Ravens, Ronald Darby is an outside guy. Rocky Ya-Sin is an outside guy. I don't think they want to move Marlon back into the slot. I just think while he can play there, I think what they would rather do, if they had to move one of their guys back there, it'd probably be Kyle Hamilton. They'd probably say, we're going to move Hamilton in there for a little bit. Geno Stone can play Hamilton's role. And I think Geno Stone is actually very underrated compared to the buzz he's been getting. But once Marlon comes back, then the top 3 guys, again, this is assuming health. So we don't know where the Ravens are going to be in week 4 or 5, whenever he comes back health-wise. But assuming everyone's healthy, it's going to be Marlon, it's going to be Rocky Ya-Sin, it's going to be Ronald Darby. And then, Jalen Davis, hopefully Pepe Williams is back by then. Caillou Kelly's on that roster, maybe DeAndre Houston Carson, who they signed recently. They have, I'd say, Q, about 9 or 10 guys who I could see on the roster. Now, they're not going to keep that many corners, but there are probably 9 or 10 guys when everyone's fully healthy where you could say, yeah, that guy probably deserves a spot. And obviously, where does Brandon Stevens play? Is he a corner or a safety? Where does Adarius Washington play? Is he a corner or a safety? Where does Daryl Worley play? Is he a corner or a safety? There are so many of those hybrid guys on this roster where maybe if you're the Ravens, you say to yourself, there are so many players that we feel like can play both corner and safety. We don't need to bring in somebody else.
That's where I'm saying, like, there is that versatility and there's a lot of preseason left, and I get it too. I'm kind of prisoner of the moment, and I'm loving what I'm seeing as far as Todd Monken and what the offense is going to look like. We got things that we can develop here. Let's not rush it.
And I think for the Ravens, there is so much that they can do from developing their young guys. The thing about that to me, though, is they're competitors. They're competing. They're trying to win a Super Bowl this year. So how much leeway do you leave? How much of a runway do you give to those young guys to develop in live game, high leverage situations? Or if they're not cutting it, if for example, if Jalen Davis keeps getting burnt, if Pepe Williams can't step up, and I'm not saying they won't, but there is the potential of the young guys not being able to step up to the moment. So if that's not the case, do you give them runway to learn? Or with the Ravens' expectations this year, do you say we just have to bring in somebody else before Marlon comes back? I think that's something they'll have to wrestle with over the course of the first couple of weeks. And then if Marlon can be back by then, that's great. And then they can have that happen. But to me, that's kind of one area where I'm looking at. But I know joint practices, Q, were an opportunity for the offense and the defense to get some live action, especially the starters against another team. You want to go out there, hit somebody else. And we saw that, didn't we, with the fights that happened on both Tuesday and Wednesday. So especially for the starters like Lamar, like Mark Andrews, like Odell, who aren't going to be playing in the preseason, this essentially is their preseason. What'd you see out there from the team on Tuesday and Wednesday against Washington?
Well, first of all, the Ravens, from an energy standpoint, when it finally got to that point, you could see where guys started warming up and the juices were flowing. And I'm telling you, it was competitive back and forth. I think, from a David Ajabu standpoint, there was some pressure. I liked what I saw from Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams. I think with Eric Bieniemy and his offensive philosophy similar to Todd Monken, I think from a Lamar Jackson aspect and the Ravens offense, definitely there were a lot of really good plays. But then there was some underthrown balls. There were some, balls where you could just see where he slung it. It just was underthrown. But the fact that they're going deep, the fact that they're, really getting into a groove, I like the concepts that I'm seeing from them. The one-on-one periods, offensive line, D-line, you can get better as a team from those individual periods.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about the one-on-ones and everything that goes on there. Now some drills are set up for the offense to win. Others are set up for the defense to win. One-on-ones, I think, are very offensively favored drill, but that doesn't mean that, it's any less impressive if Zay Flowers goes out there and cooks Emmanuel Forbes or cooks somebody like he has done time and time again. But Q, I want to ask you about the preseason. Obviously, we saw the Ravens extend their winning streak to 24 games with a 20-19. It was a thriller. It was a close game at the end of the day. And I've been asking everybody this week. I want to round out this question with you. Do you want to see the preseason streak end, or do you want to win as many games as you can? Plus, what'd you see out of the game in general?
There's nothing like competition. And within that competition, you are winning. You're seeing good, hard-nosed, hey, I got to make this play type of football. So if that is the case, keep on winning, bro. Keep on showing up. And let us worry about, oh, my God, we're going to jinx the streak or, whatever. Who cares?
Yeah, and you're right, because they're not going out there. Now we've talked about this. They're not playing Lamar for 4 quarters. They're not trying to figure things out with like, oh, we're going to just play our starters for every single second of the game. Yeah. They're doing what every team does in the preseason, which is getting a look at their young guys, getting a look at their depth, rotating guys in and out. And with that, they still win. And that's just a testament to what they've done over the years of building that team. But what you see out of some of the guys, Q, I know that I think Tyler Huntley looked like he played well. Justice Hill, I thought, played well. Keaton Mitchell, Sean Ryan made a name for himself. There were a couple other guys that maybe didn't do enough for their James Prochet, I think, definitely is in the John Harbaugh proverbial doghouse. There's the clip of Ben Cleveland going around. What were some of your big takeaways from the game?
Ben Cleveland, I think you're looking at a guy who is going up against the number 1 draft pick, and that guy is a stud. But when you look at the tape, I think that play shouldn't damn him. It is a scenario where everyone saw it. Prochet, like that was just a great catch, but nonchalant, tuck it away. And so that speaks to your level of like concentration. And I've been there before, so there was that. It was good to see an all-around effort, special teams-wise, outside of James Prochet. But then again, Justin Tucker, the GOAT doing GOAT stuff, 6-yarders, that's how I do. I just, you need me to kick 60? Tight end's doing well, although I was, saddened to see Isaiah get, I guess he had a contusion on his leg, which kind of even held him out of the Commanders practice, which that was disappointing. Yeah, on to the next one.
Yep, we'll see if they make it 25 straight on Monday against the Commanders. Could be a little chippy, a little physical like we saw in those practices on Tuesday and Wednesday. But Q, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining me today. And maybe Baltimore, by the time we get back, we'll have signed another corner. Maybe Jadeveon Clowney will be in. I think there is still more roster movement potentially on the way for the Ravens as they continue through the offseason leading up to the season beginning.
I mean, it's an exciting scenario of events.
Yep, you're making moves pretty much every single day. And obviously once the season starts, you're figuring out where your holes are. Maybe there'll be a cut down guy that the Ravens will sign that they feel like can actually be a part of this roster. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. And coming up on Monday, we'll be previewing the Commanders preseason game. We'll also be talking more about what the Ravens did over the weekend. So be sure to stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here on Monday on Locked On Ravens.